Why is China so bad at football? This is a question that seems to be asked every couple of months. The question has resurfaced once again following yet another scandal regarding Chinese football. This means that going into the next season of the Chinese Super League, half of the teams in the league will begin their campaign with negative points. 73 players, coaches and match officials have all been handed lifetime bans. This includes Li Tiyi, the former national team coach. Chen Shuyuan, the former chairman of the Chinese Football Association, was also banned. He's already serving a life sentence for accepting bribes. So why does this keep happening? Why is China so bad at football? For years, Western critics have been asking this question, but the answer is not what most think it is. It is not because the lack of Chinese football fans. There have been plenty of Chinese football fans throughout history, and it is not because of the lack of money either. China is one of the richest nations on earth, with one of the richest middle and upper classes in the world. It is simply because of politics. My name is Charles Kim, and this is The Asian Athletic. I've written an award-winning thesis about this subject, and today I'm going to explain how politics sabotages Chinese football. So what is the link between Chinese football and Chinese politics? Well, very simply, football is just one of the many tools that the Chinese government has at its disposal to exert soft power. Soft power is a type of political power. It is the opposite of hard power. Hard power is aggressive. Examples include open economic and military threats, such as economic sanctions or military invasions. So recent examples can include China's threats over Taiwan or America's kidnapping of Maduro from Venezuela. Soft power, on the other hand, is not about using coercive force, but more about slowly influencing others in order to get the outcome you want. So rather than threatening to invade another country to get what you need, you can instead open diplomatic talks or do cultural exchanges. The focus is not about material goods such as money or guns, but more about culture. China has been exerting plenty of soft power in the past few decades. One of the most famous examples is the Belt and Road Initiative, in which China has invested massively into African and Latin American countries, building new infrastructure in these developing nations in exchange for raw materials and lasting friendships. One of the most common things that you do in these countries is build brand new stadiums, giving it the nickname stadium diplomacy. So what does football have to do with all of this? Well, football has proven to be a highly effective tool to draw political power, as it can help change how foreign fans see you. A really good example is fascist Italy in the 1930s. They hosted a World Cup showing off all the amazing things that they had built and how superior the Italian race was by winning the World Cup. If we go back to China, the 2008 Olympics pushed an image to the world that China was a modern, industrialized, progressive global country, separating itself from its past image, which was more associated with Chairman Mao's legacy, authoritarian governance, and a stagnant agricultural economy. Football is the world's most popular sport, so using it as a tool is a no-brainer, especially because football isn't just a job. We all know this. It's entertainment, it's exercise, it's culture, it's part of regional and national identities, it's life itself for so many people across the world. Essentially, China identified football as a conduit to assert soft power. It sort of infiltrates into your home via your living room TV or your social media. So in 2015, Xi Jinping announced an ambitious plan to make China a global football superpower. This meant winning a World Cup by 2050, amongst other details. Consequently, he started to show that the Chinese government truly cared about football and started making these trips abroad. Xi Jinping visited the UK to be at the unveiling of Sun Jihai's inauguration to the Football Hall of Fame. That's where this infamous photo comes from. He also visited Germany, again this was football related. The CCP promised that thousands of new pitches would be constructed alongside new educational reforms to give more Chinese students the opportunities to go pro. However, even at the time, the flaws were really obvious. Firstly, countries don't become major footballing powers overnight. Take a look at Japan or the USA, for example. Both nations entered the footballing arena in the late 1980s and 1990s, and neither are anywhere close to being in the same level as South American or European teams. This isn't because these countries have had poor reforms, it's just the nature of the game. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping's plan had very distinct goals tied to certain dates, such as hiring 10,000 new coaches, building 70,000 new pitches, and having 30 million students playing football by 2030. Of course, there was then the goal of winning a World Cup by 2050. The problem was that if you don't achieve these goals by the specific dates that you have set, it ruins the image that you're trying to create. In other words, it does the complete opposite of soft power. So rather than create an attractive image about yourself to create more favorable political opportunities, you create an image of yourself that is more unreliable and untrustworthy. As a result, there was a lot of pressure from Xi Jinping and the Chinese government onto private investment to achieve these goals on time. This is what led to the insane spending we saw in the 2010s, where Chinese clubs spent millions on players like Oscar. Now, was any of this actually sustainable? Absolutely not. And on top of that, the investment was made in all of the wrong places because, quite frankly, the private companies just wanted to show that they were doing what the CCP wanted them to do rather than making sound footballing business decisions. So why did China continue this strategy? Because if China changed their strategy, it would have undermined the image that they were trying to create completely. China, along with FIFA, declared that China was the birthplace of modern football because of Kuju, an ancient Asian football game. On top of this, Chinese state media said that Deng Xiaoping was a football fan when he was young. Xi Jinping talked about football all the time. All of this was done to show that China is a legitimate footballing nation because it has a history with football. Think about it. Why are so many people so hostile towards Qatar and the money they spend, but they don't really care about all the money in England? It's because the image of English football is linked to their history. The World Cup, the Premier League, all of these legendary English footballers, and of course, the fact that association football is from England. Meanwhile, Qatar has none of this, and neither did China. By portraying itself as a country with some history with football, China made its football reforms come off as just another sports reform rather than a deliberate, calculated political move to give itself a new identity. Essentially, China was locked into this strategy. They went all in on a method that was doomed to fail, which is why Chinese football never changed. They continued to ignore grassroots talent, they continued to rely on foreign coaches and kept recruiting big names for the sake of it. And with this comes rampant corruption, because nobody that took part in the reforms actually cared about football. They cared about results. Something to show the government as proof of their competence. Within the CFA, there was widespread nepotism, underhanded business deals, and numerous political opportunists who wanted to use football to help elevate their political career within the Chinese Communist Party with whatever means possible, leading to the corruption. So, has China given up on football? Everything I have said so far would make it seem that China has given up on football as a tool for soft power. COVID saw the entirety of Chinese football come crashing down, and with the recent scandal combined with the absolutely desperate state of the Chinese national team, it might seem that China's footballing efforts are over. The Chinese government seems to be fairly silent about any future prospective footballing initiatives as well. Aside from anti-corruption campaigns, the closest we have got to the Chinese government re-entering the football arena was when Xi Jinping told Keir Starmer about which Premier League teams he likes. But the truth is that China has not given up on football. In fact, it's doubled down, just in a different way that many others have not even noticed. The Chinese government and private companies all know that the football reforms have been a failure. The rapid spending bankrupted some of China's largest corporations, and the CCP is seemingly playing whack-a-mole with their anti-corruption pursuits. So what have they done? China has instead turned to their gigantic economic presence within football. It is through business that China will exert soft power, not results on the pitch. Now, in the past, Chinese businesses have owned plenty of European clubs such as West Brom, Birmingham City, and Aston Villa. This was at the same time as Chinese investment in West Midlands transport network, improving freight connections to Southampton, home to Southampton Football Club, incidentally another club that used to be owned by Chinese businesses. Whilst these ventures have ended, China has still invested heavily into football in other ways. China was one of the biggest sponsors of UEFA Euro 2024. 5 of the 13 official global sponsors of the tournament were Chinese. These included Hisense, Alibaba, Vivo, and more. At Euro 2020, Hisense, Vivo, Alipay, and newcomer TikTok were huge sponsors. UEFA stated that the focus on Chinese companies wasn't deliberate, although it was part of an effort to try and globalize European football to draw global viewers. China doesn't just make money from Europe, but also from within. Chinese viewership of European tournaments has continued to climb. Euro 2020 had an increase in Chinese viewership of 43% compared to Euro 2016. These are both tournaments where, there are no Chinese players. Obviously, it's a European-only tournament. By doing this, China is deliberately going around the issue of having limited success in football tournaments or lacking major talent. They're going straight for the business of football itself. And nobody in Europe can argue with this strategy because it is ultimately beneficial for European clubs. Think about the number of Chinese companies that sponsor or have sponsored clubs and leagues across Europe. Commercial deals have been made between some Premier League teams and Kaiyun Sports, a Chinese company that specializes in sports event planning. Kaiyun Sports even became an official partner with Real Madrid, a display of how lucrative deals with Chinese businesses can be for European teams. Now, a great example of how important Chinese business is for Europe is the exit of Mesut Ozil from Arsenal. In the 2019-2020 season, Mesut Ozil took to Twitter to criticize the Chinese government over the treatment of the Uyghurs. Arsenal made sure to suppress his comments, afraid of alienating their Chinese market. According to the editor of the CCP media outlet The Global Times, Ozil was, quote, full of nonsense who wished for global jihad. Both CCTV and PP Sports boycotted all Arsenal games, and plenty of Chinese fans burnt Arsenal shirts. The results? Ozil's exclusion from Arsenal's squad and his eventual contract termination. Of course, Ozil's departure was also to do with other controversies, such as a refusal to take a pay cut during COVID and questionable on-field performances. But this incident with China was also a huge factor, especially because of how quick Arsenal was to shut down Ozil's comments about the Uyghurs. And it serves as a good case study to the business opportunities that European clubs see in the Chinese market. In this sense, China has successfully exerted soft power through football. Or have they? In some ways, the Mesut Ozil incident actually lacks the traditional hallmarks of soft power. It did not involve attraction to get the outcome China wanted. It was not purely about culture or other intangible materials, but rather about money. And it was not subtle by any means, and it was influenced somewhat by the CCP through the state-sponsored media. This was very much a case of aggressive business in which Arsenal had their arm twisted by the Chinese market. Simultaneously, this isn't quite hard power. It wasn't coercion directly from a government, and there was no explicit ultimatum given by the Chinese government to Arsenal Football Club. Instead, the pure anger from Chinese fans was enough to scare Arsenal into backing down. In this sense, Chinese football isn't about exerting soft power or hard power, rather it has morphed into something else. Now, in this book, Armen Sarkisian puts forward a new type of political power called Smart power. Now, there are multiple characteristics of smart power, such as adapting to the world around you, creating strategic alliances, and most importantly, specializing in something specific to turn your limitations into advantages. So for China, sure, the national team is a shambles and China has failed to generate any major talent, but the fans have become an indisposable part of European football business. Add into the fact that some of the world's most innovative and fastest growing tech companies come from China, and you have yourself a country that is vital to growing your footballing business, whether that is fan spending or sponsorships. Sarkisian's smart power idea was crafted specifically for small nations, the idea being that smaller nations have to be smart to navigate a world full of superpowers. Of course, China is a superpower, but in football, they're the total opposite, because in the footballing world, history and talent trumps all. No matter how much money Qatar or the USA want to spend, they will never have the historic legacy that Brazil or England have. This is not the fault of Qatar or the USA. They're spending the money in all the right places. They're buying interesting and quality players, building fantastic infrastructure and stadiums, and hosting amazing tournaments. Rather, it's just the weight of history. Chinese football has continued its downwards trajectory. The Asian Champions League Elite and the ACL2 has shown just how disastrous Chinese football has become, with every CSL team performing terribly. The recent scandal compounds this, showing that no progress has been made since the last wave of anti-corruption efforts back in 2024. China also, obviously, looks no closer to qualifying for a World Cup, let alone hosting one. So for now, China looks to be continuing this alternate business-oriented approach, because if there is something China is good at, it's international business. Playing football, on the other hand, well, that's a work in progress.